Well, good evening to everyone. I'd encourage you to get your Bibles out. If you want to follow along, we'll be mostly in Proverbs chapter 3 tonight. We've been studying through the book of Proverbs. We just started this Bible study, and it's all about taking the wisdom that God's people pass on and using that, making application of that wisdom to live wisely in God's world. And so, just as a very quick recap here, we kind of broke Psalms down into a few parts, and we're just in the first part here. And we're going through a series of speeches that a father is giving to his son. And so, of course, the writer of much of Proverbs is Solomon. So this is coming from Solomon to his son. And so he's writing these speeches to his son to help his son to develop moral logic, to kind of get the idea of what it means to use wisdom and get a feel for it. And he's also interspersed a couple of poems about the personification of wisdom, or Lady Wisdom. And then once we get through that part, we'll be taking that moral logic that the father explains and applying that to all of these proverbs in the middle of the book. And then we'll end with some final wisdom from a few other gentlemen. And so tonight, we're picking back up in Proverbs chapter 3. And so far, the father's given a few speeches here. The first was warning against bad company, all the dangers that lie in hanging out with the wrong crowd. After that, he gave another speech about the value of wisdom. Why is it so worth pursuing? And so he explained some of that. And then he had this poem about how Lady Wisdom cries out in the street. And so we got to see how wisdom is really available for anyone. Anyone who has the desire for it can obtain that. And so that brings us to where we are tonight. We're picking up with the third speech, which is really around the idea of trust and obedience. And so we're kind of going through those key themes with this speech. And so the father was previously, in some of his speeches, he was emphasizing the dangers that outside forces can have. Wicked forces, evil forces, hanging out with bad company, going down the wrong path, things like that. And now what we're going to see is he's encouraging his son to focus on his own character. Whereas before it was about the dangers of outside influences, you could, in other words, say that this is the dangers of inward things, inward problems, things that you have going on with your own character that are flaws. And so the father is also going to highlight the rewards that come from developing your own character. So think about that as we read through Proverbs 3 and how we might apply those same lessons in developing our own character. So let's go ahead and read the first two verses here of Proverbs chapter 3. He says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but have your heart comply with my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace will they add to you." Okay? So right off the bat, the father is enticing his son with the benefits of listening to his advice, right? What are the key benefits to following the father's commands? Matt?
Long life.
Long life, yeah. A longer life. What else? Peace, right? A longer, more peaceful life. Now, we kind of touched on this previously, but remember, these are not hard and fast guarantees, right? That's not what this is saying. This is general application. Of course, there can be exceptions. After all, we could point to Jesus, right? Jesus was more righteous than anyone. There was no sin with Jesus. And yet, Jesus lived a short life by human standards, right? I think Jesus was like 33 years old, something like that. And so he did not get a longer peaceful life. But there's a reason for that, right? It's following God's will. Matt?
Thinking about the things we previously studied, it seems that length of days and long life and peace go together. Because,
right.
Like, you're not going to get caught up in the gang and fighting with people and get yourself killed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so we can right off the bat, you can kind of see where the logic comes in here, right? If you're not doing wise things, if you're going out and you're robbing a bank, right, there's a very good chance that you're going to get hurt in the process of robbing that bank, and that could cut your life really short, right? So just by staying away from immoral, wicked practices, you can avoid dangers to yourself, right, by living a more peaceful life. And so this is the general idea that the Father is teaching here. And so we're already kind of touching on this a little bit, but how would we apply this lesson in our lives? How do we get that longer, peaceful life? Rick? Sorry, go ahead.
Just by living for Christ.
By living for Christ, okay. Rick?
When we follow the Lord and we follow His word here and we follow His laws, what He's teaching us, what the Lord teaches us to do, then we're going to have a longer, more peaceful life, even if for some reason that life is cut short here.
Right.
We're still going to have a longer, more peaceful life.
Right. If we're looking forward with a spiritual viewpoint, looking towards eternity, we know that there's eternal life waiting, right? And so if we are following this wisdom, ultimately, even if there's trouble in between, it will ultimately lead to a longer, peaceful life. Now, of course, we can become a little bit more specific here. So we talked about one way that we get this is by following God's commands, okay? Who often is the first person to teach us God's commands? Parents, right? That's what the Father is doing for His Son. And so we can see that listening, and notice I highlighted this, listening to godly parents can lead to a longer, more peaceful life. If your parents are godly people and they're passing on God's wisdom to you, that can lead to a longer, more peaceful life if you listen to them. That's the way that it should flow. That's the way that a lot of the Old Testament is set up. They're being taught that they are supposed to, as parents, be passing down this generational information. How many times is the story of the Exodus repeated in the Old Testament? Many times, right? They're constantly passing that on to the next generation because they want the next generation to understand how God has helped them. That's important that they understand that. And so they're passing that wisdom on. They're passing on the teachings of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms and the Proverbs here. So in a perfect world, the flow of wisdom and instruction goes from God to the parents, who then pass that on to their children, right? That is kind of the way that this should be going. As a matter of fact, if you briefly turn over to the book of Psalms, in Psalms 103, verse 17. Psalms 103 and verse 17 says, "But the mercy of the Lord is everlasting to everlasting for those who fear Him, and justice to His children's children." You notice that there's this benefit to the children's children. Right? And that's not the only time it's repeated in the Bible. That's just one instance. So as parents, when we live godly lives, that has a tangible benefit for our children. And as children, we should want to take advantage of what our parents are teaching us if they're godly parents. Now, I say godly parents because obviously not everyone in the world is godly. There are unrighteous people. And sometimes those unrighteous people have children and they don't raise them up in a godly way, right? So there is a point when we have to think about what we've been taught and hold it up to God's word, right? We do need to measure that. Our parents, despite loving them, are human. And that means they're capable of making mistakes. And so we should always be using God's word as our ultimate bar that we're trying to meet. That is what we are ultimately measuring ourselves against. Okay? Now, if we flip back over to the book of Proverbs, back in chapter 3, the Father here, if we continue on in verses 3 and 4, he says, "Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and a good reputation in the sight of God and man." Okay? So there are two attributes here that the Father wants the Son to keep close to Him at all times. What are those two attributes here? Mercy and truth, or kindness and truth, or maybe yours says faithfulness and truth. It's that word, that Hebrew word hesed, which kind of encompasses all of that, right? So don't let those two things leave you, right? Kindness and truth. And you notice he suggests wearing them again, right? He kind of likens them to jewelry. And if you recall, he did that with two other things in his first speech. He talked about wearing these things as if they were jewelry. Those other two things were the father's instruction and the mother's teaching. And so he suggested wearing those things, keeping them close, in other words, just the same way he's doing with kindness and truth. And of course, we can think about Ephesians and the full armor of God. It's the same idea. There are these valuable, good character components that we want to have as Christians. There are these things that we want to develop in ourselves. Again, remember, this speech is all about developing our own good character. And so he's suggesting keeping them that close to us. These need to be important things for us. Another, just a poetic way of saying that you're clothed in these things, the way that we might say we're robed in righteousness, right? So kindness and truth, two very important things that he wants him to keep here. And he says to write them on the tablet of your heart. That part about the tablet of your heart, can you think back in the Old Testament? There was an issue with Israel and their hearts. Do you remember what God said about their hearts?
They were hard.
They were hard, right? They were hard. And he said that God said he would give them what? A heart of flesh, or in a couple other cases, he said a soft heart, right? Well, if you're thinking about a tablet that you write on, it's easier to write on a clay tablet, which is soft, right? Before it hardens, right? So just something that came to my mind as I was reading through this. But the Father's point here is that these are character things that you need to develop. So the application for you and me is that we need to be kind, and we need to be truthful. We need to value those things and keep them close to us. I think actually it was Shirley. I think you had mentioned this a few Wednesdays ago, the part about wearing something on their foreheads. And so I found that verse, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 8. It takes the command to love God, and it tells the Israelites to tie them to their hand as a sign, and also they shall be as frontlets on the forehead. And so that kind of developed into a tradition of wearing these little boxes called phylacteries, in which they would actually have that verse written on there, and they would put it inside of those. And we can see that by Jesus' time, because he talked about how they would want to enlarge their phylacteries to look more holy, right? And so we kind of see that practice being abused a little bit. Have that right here. It's Matthew chapter 23 and verse 5 when he mentions this. Matthew chapter 3 and verse 5. Jesus says, and they do all their deeds to be noticed by other people, for they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. So there he's referencing those phylacteries that came about from that very practice. So bottom line here for us is we are not trying to wear kindness and truth as a way to be holier than thou. It needs to be honest and sincere, right? We can walk around trying to look like we're holy people and better than everyone else, but that's not the point. That's what the scribes and the Pharisees were doing at that time, and they completely misapplied what was meant there. Matt?
You might say, calibrate your conscience to these instructions and live that way, right?
Right, yeah, that's a great way to put that. Calibrate your conscience, there we go. Calibrate your conscience to these instructions and then live by that. Exactly. All right, so getting back to the Son there in Proverbs chapter 3, getting back to the Son, if the Son does this, if he wears kindness and truth, what will the reward be in verse 4? This is going to have a tangible benefit for him. Rick?
says he'll find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man.
Find favor and good reputation in the sight of God and man.
I forget exactly where it is, but in the gospel it mentions that about Jesus. He finds that.
Right. So we can see that exemplified in Jesus. Now, this sounds pretty good. I mean, having God's favor is good, right? But why would we care about what man thinks? I don't know too many sermons where I sit there and we talk about wanting the world to think highly of you. As Christians, we're despised many times, right? So why would we care what the world thinks of us, Rick?
Sometimes we don't, but if it gives you influence and maybe helps you bring them to God, then it's important. It's a good thing.
Right. This is one that you have to look at a little bit closer. You can't just take it as a broad statement sometimes. Because what we see is having good favor supports the Father's earlier statement of having a long, peaceful life. First of all, if you find God's favor, he can give you a long, peaceful life. If you find favor with man, that can also lead to a long, peaceful life. Now, this is important because it's not just inside the church. It is also outside the church. It's both. We want to have a good reputation with both. And as a matter of fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 7, when we're looking at the qualifications of an elder, it's specifically stated that the elder needs to have a good reputation with those who are outside the church. Right? That's kind of interesting. But think about that for a moment. A Christian should be doing good things and living a good life, right? You're not stealing from your neighbor. You're being honest and truthful with people. You're not swindling people. You're not being devious. Christians should be living a righteous life. Now, people might make fun of your beliefs, that you believe in God or Jesus or things like that, but people value it when someone is honest with them. People value it when you don't steal from them. And so even outside folks are going to appreciate this sort of thing. The first example that came to my mind was Boaz. Boaz was just a normal guy, a farmer who lived well, and he had a good reputation because of this in the town that he lived in, because he did God's commandments. People thought well of him because he was a stand-up guy for the way that he lived his life. We need to have a similar kind of reputation. After all, what if you came in here and everyone who got up in front of you and talked to you had a bad reputation around town? We were known as corrupt and crooked and swindlers. Well, then you would never want to listen to what we had to say about the gospel, right? That would have a negative influence, and that would hurt the church's reputation. So we all need to have a good reputation with those outside as well. Matt?
I found that reference that Rick was mentioning. It's in chapter 2, verse 52, and it's in the context of after Jesus gets kind of lost in the temple, his parents find him and all that. It says, and Jesus was advancing in wisdom and stature and in favor, and then precisely this, in favor with God and men. So it's
right.
two components there.
Right. And so what we can see is we should be having or striving to have a good reputation with God and with man. Okay? And that includes people inside and outside the church, right? We want to get along with everyone to the best of our ability, right? So, in a practical application here, if the son, as the father is talking to him, if the son had one day aspired to be an elder, kindness and truth are going to help him to get the good reputation he needs to be qualified as an elder. That's just one application. Now, again, you can apply this to your own life. Kindness and truth are going to help you have a good reputation in the people that you interact with. That good reputation is going to help you in getting peace, right? Imagine your neighbor for just a moment. If you fought with your neighbor all the time because you were constantly lying to them or stealing from them, well, then you're not really going to have a peaceable life. Right? So we can see that you don't have to look hard to see how this can apply to your own situation. So, Verses 5 and 6, continuing on here. He says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. So now the Father is giving two other actions for the Son to take. And what are those? He wants him to do two more things. Matt?
Trust in God and don't trust so much in yourself.
Right. Trust in God and not so much in yourself, right? So trust in him. And that goes back to wearing trust, right? He says, with all your heart. And that should be a familiar wording for all of us. We see that back in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5. And we see it in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 22 and verse 37. Jesus says that is the greatest command, is to love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your body. And so trusting him with all your heart, that's very similar language to that, right? It's putting your all into God, just like the song we sang, right? Less of me, more of thee, right? None of me, all of thee. And so it's the same idea. Not leaning on your own understanding is kind of, don't do the opposite of that, right? Don't think of yourself as being wise and going with your ways. One more thing he says. Go ahead, Rick.
He says to acknowledge him, the Lord. Acknowledge him in all your ways.
Right.
Direct your path.
Acknowledge him in all your ways. So, but what does that mean? I mean, that sounds good when we read it in the Bible, but what does it mean for a Christian?
For me, that's being thankful for everything. He leads and guides me to and through. He takes me to do all these things. I mean, all the teaching he gives me from his word, it just means in everything I do, I'm thankful and I acknowledge that it's part of his blessings to me.
Sure, that's a great example, right? Being thankful to God for all that he does for you, recognizing God's hand in the good things that come your way and being thankful for that. Does anyone else have a different answer? Or maybe another way that you acknowledge him in all your ways?
You give him the credit for seeing what he's done in your life.
Yeah, give him the credit. Another way that I sometimes look at this is when we go to God in prayer before we do something, right? We can look towards the New Testament when it talks about, it's unwise to say, well, today I'm going to go and do this, and then I'm going to go do that. And we should say, if the Lord wills, right? It's going to God before you even make plans and saying, God, this is what I would like to do. If this matches up with your will, let that happen. And if it's not your will, then steer me in the way that is your will, or something to that effect. Just considering him as a key person in everything that you do, right? Because I know that all of us could do better with our prayers. Because think about how often you talk to the person, the human closest to you, whether that's your spouse or your parent or your best friend or whoever. Think about how much you talk to them about everything. Now, how much do you talk to God about everything, right? Who do you talk to more? If God is as close to us as we say we want him to be, then we should probably talk to him like he's close to us the way we want him to be. So it's being thankful for him. It's giving him the credit. It's reaching out to him when we need it. Shirley?
If you have decisions to make in life, and especially if you've lost your spouse, and you're confronted with a decision to make, whether you should do this or do that, you need to go to God in prayer, and he will guide you.
Right, yeah. And he says that he will help guide us.
Know what you need to do.
Right. Excellent. Now, so let's say we take the Father up on this advice. We trust in God. We acknowledge God in all of our ways. What will be the result? What will be the reward? You notice this pattern that the Father's, he's saying, do these things, and then he kind of gives the benefit or the reward of this. So what's the reward of this? Matt?
It says you'll make your path straight. I think the idea is that life will be easier for you.
Right. A straight path is easier than a crooked one, right? That's the idea here. He'll make it straight, or he'll make it easy to navigate, might be another way that you say it, right? When you do these things, when you trust in God and you acknowledge him, he makes your ways more clear. And you can see that when you read through the Bible, because the Bible provides you with direction on how to react in different situations. You know, maybe you're struggling with a friend. You're having some conflict with them. Well, guess what? The Bible gives advice on how to deal with conflict. And so you don't have to wonder, well, what should I do? You can go to the Bible for some advice, right? You're going through a hard time in your life. Things are depressing, or things are sad, or things are difficult. The Bible gives advice on how to handle all of those things. It gives situations on examples of people who have lived through those things. So it guides you, and it takes away a lot of the confusion that might otherwise exist in life. So that's the reward, is that God will make your paths straight. Okay? And so we've already talked about this a little bit. What does it mean from a practical standpoint? What does it mean to trust and acknowledge God in all of our ways? I just put up one example here from the New Testament. If you turn briefly over there to James with me, James chapter 4, starting in verse 13. This is the one I referenced just a minute ago. James chapter 4 and verse 13 says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow, for you are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this and that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." Okay? So that's just one example. Making our plans with God and His will in mind. Consider praying and consulting Him before moving on with life plans. So that's just one application. Okay? So back over in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. He says, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones." And so now the father does something slightly different. He tells the son not to do something. Not to do something. And what does he say? It's kind of a repeat from earlier.
To be wise in your own eyes. A lot of us, we think, boy, we know this, and we can...
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes that sounds like when we say, do not be wise in your own eyes, you might say, oh, well, no problem. I'm not a proud person. I'm not wise in my own eyes. But really, how many times do you make a decision and the only person you've consulted is you, right? We all do it a little bit more than what we believe. You know, when you take an honest look at it, we do it quite a bit. And we make our own decisions without consulting God. And sometimes we do take our own path without even realizing we did it. It's very easy to fall into. And so he says what we should do instead is to fear the Lord and turn away from evil. And what will our reward or benefit for this be?
Health to your flesh and strength to your bones in mind. It would be
Health to your flesh and strength to your bones, right? Or healing to your body and refreshment to your bones, okay? So, and I'm glad that you read the other translation of that because I did want to throw those up. If you notice the King James Version, oh, it's a shame that Shirley's not here to hear that. We'll repeat it when she comes back. The King James Version says navel, which maybe we don't use as often today. The reason it says that is that was considered the center point of the body. So just another way to say the whole body. The New King James says flesh. The New American Standard Bible, the version I'm reading from, says body. It's just three different words to describe the same idea, right? It's your physical form, your flesh. And so this is an interesting one. Again, we usually think of spiritual healing, but here it is physical. And so how might fearing from God and turning from evil bring about physical health or physical health benefits? Addie?
For one thing, you won't do this thing that's going to harm your body.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of things we do if we're evil that will harm our body in the long run. And for doing God and doing His will, we're not gonna be doing those things that's gonna hurt us.
Exactly. That's a great example, right? There are a lot of wicked things that you can do that bring about a lot of self-harm. And if you don't do those things, you stay healthy. Matt?
You take a little bit of a figure of speech, you might just be like, you'll feel better.
Right.
In general, if you
Right.
follow God's word, you'll feel better.
Right. Especially when we talk about peace, right? A peaceful life, like you mentioned before. And we talk about the peace that surpasses all understanding. Being able to go to sleep at night and have a peaceful sleep versus a restless sleep. Which one do you feel better waking up from, right? When you go to bed without a care in the world, you wake up feeling more refreshed usually than you do if you're dreading something the night before, right? So trusting in God can bring about actual physical benefits as well. Now we're out of time for the Bible class tonight. When I come back, we will continue on with chapter 3. Although remember, next week we're going to take a short break from the book of Proverbs. We're going to continue on with Rick's lesson while I'm out. But I thank you, everyone, for your kind attention.